Welcome to Moments in Leadership. I want to start out by letting you know about something new I'm doing for Supercast supporters. Supporters have always had early access to every episode drop before they go public, but starting with this episode, I'll be publishing short bonus episodes for each new guest. These will be focused on leadership takeaways, the behind-the-scenes moments, and the stories that don't make it into the main podcast. If you'd like early access to episodes, access to these new bonus tracks, and to help me cover the costs of keeping this project ad-free, check out the Supercast link in my profile. There's 2 different donation levels. Every little bit helps. Now, as always, to all of my Supercast supporters, thank you so much. You're the reason this project continues and why I can keep it free for other emerging leaders. And if you've been listening for a while and you haven't joined yet, I'd love for you to consider supporting the show through Supercast. Your donations go directly towards offsetting the personal expenses I carry to produce this project, and they keep it commercial free. And if I ever get to a point where the donations are larger than cost associated with doing the episodes, donate all of that money to charity. Now, I also sent out an email recently asking for mailing addresses from the Supercast subscribers so I can send you all some swag. I got a coin, some patches, a few stickers, just stuff like that. But if you missed that note or it hit your spam folder, just drop me an email at themilloffice@gmail.com and I'll mail them out in batches, so it might take a few weeks. My guest today is Command Sergeant Major Joanne Naumann, United States Army. We had never met before this recording, but this conversation left a deep impression on me. Command Sergeant Major Naumann serves as the Senior Enlisted Leader for U.S. Army Special Operations Command, where she's responsible for mentoring and guiding the Army's most elite formations. She enlisted in 1996 as a voice language analyst, completed the Arabic basic course at DLI, and went on to serve with the 311th and 344th Military Intelligence Battalions before multiple assignments to special mission units. Over her distinguished career, she's deployed 14 times across CENTCOM and AFRICOM areas of responsibility and has held senior enlisted positions with Joint Special Operations Command, Special Operations Command Korea, and the Joint Special Operations Command Intelligence Brigade. Her decorations include the Defense Superior Service Medal, Legion of Merit, Bronze Star, and Defense Meritorious Service Medal, and she's the recipient of both the Order of St. Michael and the Knowlton Award. In this episode, we talk about leadership lessons learned across her career, the moments that shaped her, the mentors who challenged her, and the mindset it takes to keep showing up when pressure and expectations are unrelenting. She shares perspective on feedback, emotional intelligence, and the importance of radical candor in developing trust and accountability within a team. So let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Command Sergeant Major Joanne Naumann.
Welcome, Command Sergeant Major Joanne Naumann, the Senior Enlisted Leader for United States Army Special Operations Command. This is really great. I'm so glad that Sergeant Major of the Army Weimer hooked us up. And I know it's been a challenge to get us going, and we have about an hour to get through some questions. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your patience as we've kind of worked through a crazy schedule this summer, but glad have the opportunity to chat.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm going to jump right into it since we only have an hour. I'm kind of curious, everybody has their own spin on what leadership really means. What's yours? Do you follow the classic principles or did you develop your own playbook along the way?
Yeah, I think over 20, well, 27, 26, 27 years now as an NCO, 30 years in the Army, you kind of develop your own. Obviously as a young leader, you get the principles that are given to you. But I would say my philosophy at this point, and I think it's probably pretty common in the Army, is that the leader is not the person who everyone works for. The leader is the person who works for everyone. And so it's exactly the same words with just a slightly different order. I think it's a really important thing to think about leadership in that way, though. A manager can be the person everyone works for. And yes, a leader is frequently the person at the top of an organization, but not always. Leadership can happen in all kinds of places. But a leader is a person who wants everyone else to be successful and who works to make everyone else successful, getting them what they need, pointing the organization in the right direction, whatever that is. But the real job of a leader is not to make themselves successful. It's to make their organization successful and to make all the people around them successful.
Yeah. So when you think about emerging leaders and young leaders in any branch of the service, and just so we don't go through all the ranks, let's just say E4, E5, right?
Yep.
That corporal sergeant level in the Army and the Marine Corps, and then the petty officers and things like that in the Navy. What is it that you've learned where you are now from what you just said about what your own playbook is and how you developed it along the way? What are some of the most essential things that those E4s and E5s need to develop first as young emerging leaders in the services?
I think the number one thing, and I think it's both the easiest and the hardest thing to do, is care. And I say it's the easiest and the hardest, right? If you genuinely care about your people, you are going to be the person who works for everyone. You're going to do the right things to take care of them. You're going to make sure they're successful. You're going to, you know, be a little bit intrusive and get to know what's going on in their lives so that you can maybe foresee some of the issues before they come up. But I also say it's the hardest thing to do because genuinely caring about people is exhausting. It's you're giving a piece of yourself to those other people. You are, whatever's going on in their life is building you up or bringing you down. It's getting emotionally involved and not just involved on a piece of paper. Yes, you do have to do all the basic leadership stuff, counseling, making sure they know what their job is, training them. All of those things have to happen. All of those things are a part of that, but you have to do it from a place of genuine caring.
Yeah, right. If you think back to your first 5 years in the military, kind of your E1 through E5 time frame, what stories from that time stick with you as defining leadership moments based on what you just said the emerging leader should really be working at? What were some of your wins and failures? Who were some of the mentors that shaped you? Things like that.
In my career, I would say, I really have one moment that I always think back to, and I tell this story all of the time because it absolutely shaped who I am as a leader. And that is it's actually the same month I promoted to E6. So I promoted to staff sergeant on 1 October 2001. And, so that's an important date to keep in mind because, the Army, the military was obviously going through a major change at that moment. 9/11 had just happened. We were figuring out what the reaction to that was going to be. We were deploying. And for those of us who came into the Army in the mid 90s, there weren't a whole lot of deployments. Not
Mm-hmm.
like the people who came in the early 2000s who were constantly on the go. And so, 9/11 really created a massive shift in what we were doing in the Army at that point. And so I had just promoted to E6. And at the same time, I was offered an opportunity to serve in a special mission unit, which is where I've served for most of my career. But I was at the 101st at the time, and the 101st was getting ready to deploy to Afghanistan. And I was supposed to go, and I was a squad leader at the time. I had the opportunity to go talk to the division command sergeant major, CSM Cliff West, and I went to talk to him about, what should I do? Should I take this opportunity to go to special operations, or should I, stay and do the deployment with the division? It was absolutely the hardest decision I had made in my life to that point because I felt like this was going to be my squad's first deployment. And how do I let them go on this deployment without their leader? That would be my failure as a leader if I let them deploy it without me. And so I went to go talk to Sergeant Major West about it. And he gave me a very simple answer. He told me, Sergeant, if you've done your job, they don't need you.
Hmm.
And he changed my vision of what failure is as a leader, right? My failure wouldn't be to not go with them. My failure would have been if I didn't make sure that they were so well prepared that they could do it without me. And I tell that story because it has defined from that moment on who I've wanted to be as an NCO is not ever the person who's irreplaceable, but the person who is responsible for making everyone else capable to take my place if need be.
Yeah, I think that that's such a valuable lesson to share because so many other of my guests have talked about getting people ready for deployment, getting people ready for combat. And a lot of times you just don't see it coming. There could be anything going on in the world, and next thing you know, you're in some hotspot. And if you haven't spent the time getting your soldiers, Marines, airmen, sailors ready for whatever it is they're going to face, you failed as a leader. So I really appreciate you putting it that way because I think it really hits home. There was a really interesting article that I come back to a number of times when I interview people. There was a piece in Proceedings magazine that was called Lead from the Front, Not Always. And it made the case that sometimes leading from the front can actually really confuse your role as a leader. And I'm wondering if there was ever a time in your career that that lesson hit home for you.
I think that lesson really has hit home for me as I've gotten into more senior roles. I think it's kind of easy to lead from the front as an E5, as an E6, team leader, squad leader, you have half a dozen people. I mean, maybe even as a platoon sergeant with 30 people, 40 people, you can lead from the front, right? And certainly as a team leader, I knew the job of every member of my team. Like, not just I knew in my head what it was, but I could do it if I had to.
Mhm.
As a senior leader, I couldn't do the job of half of the people in USASOC because I don't know it. I'm not a personnelist. I couldn't go down into my G1 shop and just be a personnelist tomorrow.
Right.
And so you have to trust the people who work for you. You have to give up control. And it can be really hard. I think that transition at about the E7 level is where that kind of really takes place for most NCOs, I think. It can be really challenging because you've gotten so used to being the person who knows everything, the expert. And then you suddenly hit this point where, there are things you just don't, you've never been trained to do, and you have to give up that control. There's still some leading from the front. You still have to be present and show up every day, but you cannot be the person who just does everything.
Right. Realizing that the special operations community is really unique with its rank structure. I mean, by the time, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think by the time most people get out of a pipeline and into an organization that they're actually out there doing their job, they're already NCOs. But so much of my audience is E5 and below who are listening, who are trying to glean nuggets of wisdom from people who have been very successful in their careers about what they can do right now. What sort of advice do you have along those lines of, like, when you said trusting your people? That may be really easy to do when you're an E7 and you're trusting E6s and E5s you have, especially in the special operations community, right? Because you're dealing with the 1% of the 1%. But what about the E4 or the E5 who's being told by Command Sergeant Major Naumann, just trust your people to do your job, and they're looking at a bunch of 19-year-olds that don't really know a whole lot? That's a challenge. You have some advice for those folks?
It is a challenge. And, here would be my first piece of advice, right? I make the assumption that there's no soldier who wakes up in the morning and thinks to themselves, first thing in the morning, Monday morning, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to see how badly I can screw up today.
Mm-hmm.
No one thinks that. That's not your first thought in the morning. And so, I would tell them to keep that in mind when dealing with soldiers. And that's why you have to trust them, because they are coming to work and doing the best that they can. I mean, sometimes our best varies from day to day, and the best is going to vary from individual to individual. And so as a young leader, that's part of knowing your troops, is knowing, what do I trust them with and what do I need to give them a little bit more guidance in? But that's how you grow that trust, is you start giving them trust in small places, and you continually build that as they gain more skills, as they get more responsible. And sometimes you have to let them mess up. Sometimes we have to learn things the hard way.
Yeah, exactly. In that context, that was a little bit of a setup for my next question. But
Okay.
if you think back over your career, if you had one leadership do-over, like a decision or a moment where you wish you could go back and handle it totally differently, I hope you have some. What would it be, and what would you want young leaders to take away from it? And a story would be great.
Yeah. I'm actually going to give probably not the answer you're expecting for this one,
Okay, perfect.
because the what would I do over is actually nothing. But there is a story associated with that.
Okay.
And the reason I say nothing is because, when I look back at 30 years in the Army that got me to be at the level that I am now, serving as the USASOC CSM, I got there through the good decisions and the bad decisions, not just the good decisions. So those bad decisions are often the things you learn the most from.
Hmm.
Look, I've made some epically bad decisions in my career. Everything from, not taking good care of myself, which is, I would argue, one of the worst decisions I've ever made, to small things, on a day-to-day basis. I actually once missed a flight because I set my alarm for PM instead of AM. That's such a small, wrong decision. Like everybody has probably done that at some point in their life. I chose to do it on a day that I had a really early morning flight. Not a good look when you're not back from TDY on time because you slept through your flight. But I'm still glad I made that decision because it helped me to remember attention to detail.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't end my career. Did I get in trouble? Oh, yes. I was an E5. So, my platoon sergeant was none too thrilled when I wasn't back on time. I was otherwise a good soldier. And so did I get an Article 15? No, but I had to show up early every morning for the next 2 months to prove that I could set an alarm properly. But I did learn from that. And so, I would remind people that don't wish to take back the bad decisions. Choose to learn from them instead.
Real quick plug, I've been trying to get this effort underwritten by a corporate sponsor, so I'm asking for your help. If you or anyone you know is affiliated with a company that caters to the military or veterans community, I'd ultimately like to get this project underwritten by a company. So please reach out to me at themilloffice@gmail.com. You can DM me on Instagram at themilloffice or over my LinkedIn account. My personal account is David B. Armstrong, CFA, or the Mill Office LinkedIn account as well. Now back to the pod. Yeah, that's great. I appreciate you saying that you had some NCO Article 15 off the books, Article 15 or whatever you want to call it. We call them NJPs. But I think maybe just staying on this for 1 second, I have a personal belief that really, really good service members find themselves in trouble, whether it's AM or PM or even something a little bit more grave than that. And so for the folks that do show up with Article 15s, because I'm sure you see them, especially in your position right now, being in charge of good order and discipline in your unit and the subordinate units, what do you say to somebody who really, they screwed up, they got an Article 15, but they really want to continue to serve and have a professional career? How do they bounce back from that?
I would say learn from it. And I would tell you, as a battalion CSM, my best company first sergeant had an Article 15 as a staff sergeant. Not even an Article 15 like as a private, as a staff sergeant got an Article 15.
Yeah.
He was my best first sergeant. And part of that was because he did get people and he didn't just throw the book at everybody the second that they showed up late to formation, right? He listened to them. He wanted to know about them. He understood that people make mistakes because he made mistakes, and it made him a phenomenal leader. And so an Article 15 is not the end of your career. What is the end of your career is not taking responsibility for it, because the only way you learn from a mistake is own it. Accept the fact that you made the mistake, choose to learn from it, and own that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's really sage advice. What sort of advice would you give a young leader? And this can apply to military and civilian, but how to take some of the lessons that you've been sharing and start to build their own leadership style? Because I think this is just my own personal opinion. Everybody can argue with me, and that's fine. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here, but here's mine. I think some of the hardest leadership positions to be in is O1, O2, E4, E5, because it's your first time doing it and you're still relatively inexperienced. So how does somebody go about building on their own leadership style? Do you suggest emulating others?
I agree. I always tell people I think E5, E6 is the hardest part of leadership. And it is because you are brand new to it. E5, especially when you think about it, like these young people, yesterday they were your friends.
Yeah.
And now you're supposed to be their leader, right? And you're the one being held responsible, and you're the one who has to tell them, like, sorry, but we're going to have to stay and work late today or whatever, and I think that's incredibly challenging for young people to do. And so the number one thing I would tell people is find leaders you respect and have conversations with them. I will tell you something I think that the Navy does incredibly well, although they don't do it until the senior NCO ranks for chief. But they do the whole chief's initiation into the chief's mess. But part of what they have to do is they have to get what they call charges from senior leaders, or people more senior to them. So, E7 and above.
Mm-hmm.
But the charge is to sit down and have a conversation and ultimately get a letter or some notes from these senior leaders about how to be a good leader. And they have to do it. It's not optional. What a fantastic idea if we made young E5s talk to half a dozen or a dozen different people who are more senior to them
Mm-hmm.
about leadership and get some of their ideas. And then you're going to put them together into your own style. There is no right answer. Every leader, you have to do what's authentic to you. Exactly what works for me is not going to be exactly what works for someone else. Because if they're faking it, if they have to try too hard, it just comes off weird and clunky. I would say, I don't know, just came up with that idea kind of right now, talking about it out loud, but I think it would be great if we required every brand new E5 to get, a dozen different charges from more senior leaders of, kind of their leadership philosophy and recommendations.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things I'm trying to solve for with this project. I don't even really call it a podcast. I call it my project, which is, how can I create a medium that allows people like you and others to share their charge, get charges, or how can people do it in the digital space and listen to all these stories and hear all these great experiences and form their own leadership style from it. So hence the name Moments in Leadership.
I think it's great, but I would tell your listeners too, like, don't be afraid to reach out to people. Like, if there's someone whose leadership you admire, even if they're senior to you or you don't work in their chain of command or whatever, reach out. Most leaders are not going to tell you no. You might wait a while before you get a chance to have a phone call with someone, but I don't know. I think it's super exciting and it just fills my tank when I'm sitting down talking. I was just talking to a young specialist last week who I met at our USASOC Best Squad competition, who reached out and said, she just wanted to talk about options for her future. Yes, she came into it thinking like she's getting something out of it, and hopefully she did. But it fills my tank too to just hear these young people who are so excited and full of energy and wanting to accomplish all these things that are in the rearview mirror for me now. Like it just makes me feel young again.
I recently told somebody the other day that it's hard to know if you're doing a good job as a leader. I'm guessing not many people come up to you on a daily basis like, your subordinates, you're doing such a great job, Command Sergeant Major. Thanks so much. I mean, just like you become a little less approachable the more senior you get. And so this young officer was asking me, like, how do I know if I'm doing a good job as a leader? I was like, well, you won't know in the moment. You'll know later on by how many people that you used to work with when you were in charge of them continue to want to stay in touch with you and call you up and ask you for advice and mentorship. And if nobody calls you up from that era, then you probably didn't do a really good job. And I look at my own experiences and I have commanders that I just revered, and I would call them up even to this day and ask them for advice and question. And then there's people I wouldn't even lift a finger to find their phone number, let alone call them. Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's very valuable. On the topic of mentorship, this is sort of a off the cuff question. It just dawned on
Yeah.
me, but who were some of your mentors, and was it hard to find female senior mentorship when you were younger in your career?
So none of my mentors were female.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Yeah.
No, a couple of reasons for that. I mean, first, when I went into special operations, there weren't, I went into special operations in 2002. There weren't a whole lot of us. And the ones who were there were all kind of more in my peer group. And so, they weren't, I would say, really mentors. We certainly, shared some struggles across our peer group. But I mean, I've had mentors. My first platoon sergeant was, a phenomenal mentor to me. I didn't necessarily see it that way at the time. I thought he was really, really hard on me. I understand now he was really hard on me. He was really hard on me because he saw potential and he wasn't going to let me slack. And I appreciated that. We actually worked together again. He was my platoon sergeant when I was E4, E5. We worked together again when I was an E7, and I had much more appreciation for that, and was able to, I think, more intentionally utilize his mentorship rather than the mentorship he was giving me, whether I liked it or not, when I was a young soldier. And then I've just had some phenomenal, mentors in the special operations community, both on the officer and in the enlisted side, who I'm still very much in touch with, although most of them are retired at this point. That's the reality. If you get to this point, that everyone who went ahead of me is already out of the Army.
Yeah, I understand that.
So, but I still call them and still ask them, for their thoughts. And they still check on me. I got a random text from one of them just last week, just saying, "Hey, just checking in to see how I'm doing." But more importantly, I think Mentorship is about who you want to be like and who sees potential in you. And that's not defined by any characteristic. I had an infantry sergeant major who was a mentor to me, actually a couple of infantry sergeants major. And I mean, men who were in a totally different career field than me, but I just liked the way that they led. And so I sought out those people. And I don't think it's about any characteristic. It's about their leadership style. You see something that you want to be like, and that's the people you go ask.
Sticking on that, the importance of leaders, a couple quick questions there, but what have you found to be more important in a leader? Confidence or humility? Enjoying moments in leadership? Help the project get more guests and reach more listeners by leaving a 5-star rating and a quick review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It literally takes like 5 or 10 seconds to do it. And the reviews really help me to continue bringing in inspiring stories from senior military leaders. Additionally, when these guests see that it's popular or hear about it around their commands, it helps me get them on as guests as well. So thanks.
I actually just had this conversation this morning with a brand new sergeant major. He just recently promoted to sergeant major, and he's kind of struggling with being a sergeant major. How do I be a sergeant major? And I told him exactly that there are 2 traits that you have to have. The first is confidence. You're in a room, you're a sergeant major because you have the potential to be a sergeant major. The Army saw that in you. If it's that you're a brand new sergeant, you're a sergeant because your leaders see that you've got the ability to be a sergeant. Be confident and own that. But you also have to have the humility to understand what you don't know and to admit what you don't know and to ask questions, which I also think as a leader makes you a lot more human and approachable. One, I think soldiers love it when they're the person teaching the sergeant major what to do, certainly. It's a great experience for them, to be able to be the expert on something. But it's also about learning, right? I mean, we've all seen the leaders who fake that they know something they don't know, and it generally doesn't end well. And they always get found out in the end anyway, so you're just better off having the humility to ask the question. And so I think you can't have one without the other, right? Confidence without humility is dangerous, but humility without confidence isn't leadership.
Sticking with what matters more with a leader, we talked a little bit about moral courage and then the battlefield courage, but there's also physical courage. Like, do you have an opinion on which one matters more, or maybe they both matter the same?
I'm going to go moral courage on this one. And it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, right? The physical courage, in some senses, almost takes care of itself. It's mothers who lift cars off their kids that they're not capable of doing that, but somehow they are capable of doing it in the moment. I think, moral courage is much harder to do. I think it's important more from an overall military sense, because the biggest one that I see people struggle with moral courage is, quite frankly, having hard conversations. And I'm not talking about major conversations about hey, you're about to do something unethical. Just having the conversation about, hey, you're not doing a really great job and we need to talk about how to improve it. And those are hard no one likes having those conversations. I don't like having those conversations. I never like to look at a soldier and say, you're really not doing great. But you do it by also helping them get better. Again, I go back to the basics of leadership. And this was one of my practices always particularly as a battalion CSM at that first level where soldiers are coming, first sergeants are coming to you and they're like, man, Specialist Jones, he should probably get an Article 15 because he's all kinds of messed up. Or I'm going to remove Sergeant Smith from this position because he's not doing a great job. And when I would ask to see the counseling, I would always flip it over to the backside. And the first thing I would look at is the leader responsibilities. Because if the leader responsibilities were blank, I'd give it right back. And I'd say, you still have work to do.
Yeah.
Because again, Sergeant Smith didn't wake up every morning and think that he really wanted to mess up today. So if he's messing up, it's because he probably doesn't know any better. So what did you as a leader do to help him get better?
You had an episode from the Green Notebook. It was episode 151 for listeners who want to go listen to it. But you said in that non-commissioned officers must model their courage to, quote, deliver blunt feedback. How are you training battalion and brigade level NCOs to give that feedback, up, down across the chain of command without creating fear or cynicism? And then second question, how are you measuring that?
Okay, I'll start with the easy question, which is how am I training it? I talk to all of the sergeants major that I work with, both staff and then, at the group level, brigade level group for us, but same O6 level and the subordinate commands about giving that hard feedback. And I think it's something we need to teach people how to do. And that's a lot of what I try to do. One, I highly recommend the book Radical Candor
Mm-hmm.
because it does get into how do you do that properly. A lot of us have been taught to create the criticism sandwich where you give somebody something, you tell them something good about themselves, and then you give them criticism, and then you end with something good about themselves. And one of the things I learned from the book Radical Candor is that that's horrible because people have a primacy bias and a recency bias. So now when I walk out of the room, I remember the first thing you told me, I'm doing great, and the last thing you told me, I'm doing great. And I completely forget that thing in the middle. And so I let everybody know when you're going to give somebody negative feedback, you have to do that as a standalone conversation. Don't make it a part of something else. Bring the person in to have that conversation about what's not going well. But then the critical part of that is what is the plan to fix it and how you do it. So there's a difference between telling somebody you are a bad person or this thing is not being done well. This thing is bad, right? Your inability to do a certain thing doesn't make you a bad person. It's not you're a failure. This task failed, but you're not a failure. And so we can fix it. And then there has to be a plan going forward. And there has to be a plan to follow up. As a leader, I can't just be like, hey, you're messed up. Here's what I want you to do. I have to come back and follow up. And then one of the most powerful things you can do as a leader, and I've got a great example for this one, is if they fix it, if they turn it around, giving them praise later is so powerful. I had an NCO who worked for me in my one shop overseas as the SOC Corps CSM. And quite frankly, she wasn't living up to what I expected as an NCOIC. And so I brought her into the office and I had that conversation with her. And I told her what my expectations were for an NCOIC and where she was falling short and what I needed her to do to step up. Well, it turns out now I come to USASOC and she's working in the USASOC G1 shop.
Oh, that's great.
And, she PCS only about 6 or 7 months after I got to SOC Corps. So I didn't really get to see a whole lot of the development. And so about 6 or 7 months into my time at USASOC, I called her up. I asked, my ops NCO to schedule an office call with her, and I called her up to my office. And I have to imagine she was a little bit nervous coming up, given the way our previous conversation had gone. But in this case, I brought her up to say, and you are killing it. You are doing such a phenomenal job. The turnaround is a 180. You took what I said to heart, and you have absolutely made good on it. And you're doing a fantastic job, and you've got the potential to promote to Sergeant Major. I think that you are the kind of person I want as a Sergeant Major, not only because you're good at your job, but because you take feedback so well. And man, her face lit up. What a great opportunity to get told, yeah, you know what? You weren't great. And now you're doing great.
If you're able to chip in a little bit to help the project, please head over to my Supercast support page at mill.supercast.com or through the link in the show notes. Every little bit helps. Now back to the pod. That's awesome. Kind of sticking on that subject of leadership, specifically that, do you think it matters if your people like you as a leader? I'm the kind of person who doesn't like it when people don't like me. So one of the things I have to catch myself every now and then is, not everybody you're leading has to be your friend. But does it matter if people like you as a leader? And if someone is respected but unlikable, could that conversely be a problem? And what has your experience taught you about that?
So my experience is that that's actually kind of a false question. If I think about the leaders I really like, and I'm thinking of in terms of I like you as a leader, right? There's a difference between I like you as a leader versus I want to have a beer with you on Friday night. And yes, there are some people who fall in both of those categories. There are also some people, and I absolutely want to have a beer with on Friday night, I wouldn't want them in charge of my kid or me for that matter, right? Like they're
Right,
just not
right.
great leaders, but
Yeah.
they're fun people. But when I think of the people that, man, who are the leaders I really liked? The one thing that every one of them has in common, because they didn't all lead exactly the same, the one thing they all have in common is I respected every single one of them. I think that as a leader, being respected is what makes you liked. And when you talk about a leader who's respected but not liked, I
Mhm.
would argue the word you're looking for is probably not respect, it's fear.
That's a great answer. Follow-up question here, but do you think our system, whether it's the Army system, the military system, whatever, I guess you say it's probably across all branches of the service, but do you think our system unintentionally rewards leaders who play it safe, especially in training or in career decisions? And is that hurting leadership and the force in the long run?
Yeah, I absolutely think in general, the Army system encourages playing it safe. And I would say that on the NCO side from the existence of a career map, right? A career map is great if it's a guideline, but then you look at promotions and like we're told you're going to get promoted if you check off all these boxes. And so people look to check off all those boxes. And if the really hard or really interesting job isn't one of those boxes, you're almost discouraged from taking it because it's like, well, then am I going to get promoted if I take this thing?
Right.
Right? Like we've got to have a system that's a mix of the both. Like a career map's a good guideline. I don't think we should get rid of them, but we've got to come up with a way to advertise like it's a guideline. And I point to myself as the anomaly to that. I checked 0 boxes on my career map. I've had a super weird career. There is no guideline that existed, 20, 30 years ago that said, I'm the person who winds up as the USASOC CSM, but here I am. And so, I mean, there are certainly outliers to that. And I always encourage people, like, just take the chances. It's going to work out. And I use myself as the example. But the reality is I can't promise that. Whereas you kind of can promise, like, well, you got your 2 years of first sergeant time, you got your 2 years of platoon sergeant time, you got your 2 years of squad leader time. Okay, yep, you're qualified to be a sergeant major. And maybe you don't do anything that's risky. Look at the situation we're in right now, right? Transform in contact. Well, the only way we can do that is to make mistakes.
Mhm.
It is the only way you can make change because if you wait until you have the right answer, it's too late.
Right.
And so we've got to encourage people to make mistakes. I mean, I'm watching it play out in real time. People are scared to death to make a mistake because if I make a mistake, I might not get promoted. I think this is one of the really freeing things about being an NCO because I'm not the person on the blame line ultimately for most
Right.
things, right? The commander owns all the responsibility. I have this argument with General Braga all of the time, about who has the best job in the Army. And I remind him that we both get to do all the cool things, but he owns all the responsibility. Therefore, clearly, I have the best job in the Army.
That's great. Yeah, it's funny. I experienced some of this with my podcast guests too. And one of the things I like to joke about is it's super easy to get people who have 28 to 30 years in the military service to come on as guests. And it's super hard to get the ones that come on that have 22 to 25 years of experience. Like
$100%.
it's really hard to get a 1-star or 2-star to come on the podcast because they all want to be 3 stars and don't want to do anything wrong. And then the 3 stars are like, oh, geez, what's left for me? I'll get on the podcast. But I appreciate your
Ask
answer.
sergeants major, because here's the beauty of being a sergeant major. I'm never getting promoted again. I get more responsibility and more work to do every time I move up, but no bigger paycheck. And if the Army fires me, then they have to pay me and I don't have to get up at 4:30 in the morning. So I really have nothing to lose.
Yeah. If you look back from the senior ranks, what's a piece of conventional leadership wisdom that you've personally come to disagree with? Something that people treat as gospel that might actually be holding leaders at any level, senior levels or emerging leaders back.
Yeah, this is a super easy one for me because this is absolutely my biggest mistake.
Oh, great. Then you're going to love my last question. So,
Great. Leaders eat last.
hmm
I disagree. I'm not talking about literally at the chow line. I'm talking about taking care of yourself, right? Like the whole sentiment is I'm going to take care of everybody else and I'm not going to take care of myself. But I tell people this as a leader, you are the product. Your ability to function, your ability to make good decisions, your ability to be there when people really need you to be there, that is what you are selling. That's the product. People are counting on you to make a good decision. They're counting on you to be there when they need you.
Mm-hmm.
They're counting on you to be able to give 100% every day. And that involves you having something in the tank. And that doesn't mean that in an emergency situation, you can't stay up all night. You can't have a longer, more stressful day than you'd like to have. You certainly can, but you cannot have that day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. At some point, you have to refill your own tank. And so I take care of myself first every day. I get up in the morning, I meditate, I read, I have my coffee, I have my PT, I have my breakfast. The first thing I do every single day is take care of me, because then when I come to work, I am on my game and I am ready to give 110% to USASOC. And I couldn't do that if I was, and I sleep every night. I get 7 hours of sleep every night. Not every night, most nights. But the reality is, if my battery is always at 90% and now you need me to run really fast for a couple of days and I drain my battery to 20%, it's okay. I'm going to turn around and I'm going to recharge it. But if I'm constantly running on a battery that's at 20% and then I have a bad day or there's an emergency and you need me to give more, where are you getting that from? You're not. You're providing a lousy product.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much. I am going to award you with an Impact Dave Armstrong compliment as giving the best answer to that question of any guest I've had in almost 50 episodes. So that was fantastic.
Wow.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, that was awesome.
All right. You made my day. I got
There
an
you
award
go.
on a Monday.
I don't have any awarding authority other than a verbal compliment, but there you go. Tell me about the exact moment when someone called you up and said, "Hey, Joanne, you're going to be the command sergeant major for USASOC." Because that must have been a wild phone call or something, or maybe you saw it coming. I don't know. It's always an interesting question. And then,
Yeah, the exact moment. So I was in Korea prior to this. And so both my interview with General Braga and my phone call with him afterwards were early in the morning because of the time difference. And, so early in the morning there, evening here. I woke up in the morning. I had an email from his XO at the time saying, did I have time for a phone call with General Braga? Obviously, yes, I do. And I mean, I knew what it was about. I knew I had interviewed. And so I knew I was getting the answer on whether or not I got the job.
but you had no idea, right? You're going into that phone call cold, like I'm either getting the yes or no here.
Well, knowing I'm going to get a yes or no, but honestly, in my head, expecting a no.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, right, there was really no precedence for someone from my background to be in this job. And I felt like it was a long shot going into the interview. But, if you don't take the long shot, you never make them. And so went into it, going to give it my best, but understanding it was a long shot. And so now here's the conversation with General Braga. He calls, I answer the phone. He asks me how I'm doing. For context, my husband and I lived as geo bachelors for 6 years. So he's also a sergeant major, now retired. So he's a full-time trophy husband now. We were geo batching at the time. He was in DC, I was in Korea. So General Braga's like, hey, I just want to really comment on how you're all in and, you're ready to serve. And I know you and TJ have given up a lot for you to pursue your careers. And so, I just really want to compliment you on how much you're willing to give and how much you do give. And to me, this is the letdown speech, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're telling me something great about myself so that you can say, but I decided to go a different direction. And so in my head, I am like prepared to say, hey, sir, thanks for the opportunity. Really glad I had the chance to interview. And if I can ever do anything to help you, USASOC, just let me know. That's in my head. That's my answer that I'm now prepared to give.
Right.
And then he said, if you're still all in, I'd love you to come to USASOC and be our sergeant major.
God, that's awesome.
I'm like, I was speechless, completely speechless, because I had an answer and it was obviously now the wrong answer. So I said, I would love to.
That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that because, somewhere out there, probably E1, E2, E3 is the future Sergeant Major of the Army, is the future Command Sergeant Major for USASOC. I mean,
Yes.
those men and women are out there right now, E1, E2, E3, and for them to hear stories about the phone call that you got, I just always love to hear those stories from everybody about
Always
what were
take
you
the
doing
long
when you
shot.
get to go. Right, exactly. Well, Command Sergeant Major Joanne Naumann, Senior Enlisted Leader for United States Special Operations Command, this has been awesome. If I'm ever down at Bragg, I will definitely make sure that I give you plenty of heads up notice so I can meet you in person. But I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and come on and help emerging leaders be the best that they can be and be the best leaders that they can be now and in the future. So thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you.